We're travelling back in time to Doctor Who 1965, as in today's Doctor Who vinyl record review, I'm going to be taking a look at yet another vinyl record collector set from the Demon Music Group, this time round the Season 2 First Doctor story, The Web Planet, featuring none other than the Zarbi. Now this is of course the latest release as a part of the Demon Music Group series, and it is currently available to be purchased from a number of different retailers. As per usual, there is two different versions available. The recommended retail for each is around £49.99, as there is 4 records in this set. It is slightly cheaper to some of the other versions that have been released as a part of this series so far. This review is in fact going to be of the standard pinkish red variation of record, as opposed to the Vortis vinyl splatter variation that is in fact a Amazon exclusive, limited edition to 500 units. I'll leave the link in the description below to take a look at both of the different variations, both of which look incredibly nice and pretty much both feature exactly the same artwork. So naturally, and as always, this review is in fact going to be a 2-in-1. The first half of this review I'm going to be taking a look at the product itself, and in the second half I'm going to be taking a look at the Web Planet as an actual Doctor Who serial, as I have a little bit of a confession to make. I have never seen the Web Planet, and I'm quite intrigued by it. I've heard good things, I've heard bad things, I've heard hilarious things, and quite frankly, I am really looking forward to it. So this review is in fact going to be rather interesting. So taking a look at the record collector set itself, once again Demon Music Group have done an absolutely brilliant job on this release, and it looks incredibly nice and vibrant. At the very top of the box we have the inclusion of the BBC and Doctor Who 13th Doctor new series logo. This time round the logo has in fact been embossed in a rubber, and it really nicely stands out on the darker skyline of Vortis, with a few red speckles dotted about around it. Just below this we have the Web Planet, rather nicely printed, and to be honest it would have been nice if this was in fact embossed as well. Now of course at the bottom of the box, as per usual, we have the inclusion of the slogan, which is of course the original BBC TV soundtrack to the Web Planet that does of course exist in the archive. And unlike the previous releases as a part of this series, including the Daleks Master Plan, Evil of the Daleks and the Abominable Snowmen, the Web Planet is in fact the first as a part of this series of 1960s releases to in fact be an episode that exists in its entirety within the BBC archive, so you can in fact purchase a DVD of this story and watch it visually, as opposed to resorting to telesnaps or of course the Target novelisation. However, this time round they are of course using the original BBC TV soundtrack, with of course your usual linking narration. Taking a closer look at the main artwork now, I still cannot quite believe that we have a record release with Zarbis emblazoned all over the front. Yet here we are, the year is 2020, and we have exactly that, and it looks absolutely brilliant. I love it. I love the fact that we've got, once again, a very 1960s sci-fi design on this. It looks very B-movie and over the top and ridiculous. It's giant ants on an alien landscape, and it just looks really bloody cool. Once again, we have a glowing design that has been used on some of the previous releases, most notably Evil of the Daleks, having a rather similar red glow. However, this time round, that red glow has kind of been replaced with a burgundy and bright red and almost a pinkish glow towards the bottom here, which is a lot different compared to the other version. It's a lot warmer. Once more, this release follows a rather similar style to the previous releases, because they have of course been created by the same artist, being Daniel Ascom and Ellie Fennell, so we do have a rather lovely looking highlight that has been applied over the top of the different characters to accentuate some of the details, especially on this top half of the Zarbi here, but also exaggerate the silhouette. Of course we have in the skyline of the alien landscape towards the very bottom, we have this rather lovely looking pinkish red glow, which then as a result almost lights up the rest of the body of the Zarbi, looking very unusual, almost crawling along. And then as we go closer to the floor, it's not necessarily a dark colour, it's almost just a greenish sort of blue design that has been used to replicate the landscape, and once again we have that highlight almost detailing the different edges and grooves on the rocks. It gives a lot of depth to this. You edge into that darker colour scheme as we fade into the darkness of the sky, which once again has been given this speckled effect over the top. I really love the inclusion of almost these waves coming up from the sky, almost looking a bit like the Northern Lights in a way, especially around this section here, almost waving. And then we have a few red speckles, and of course the inclusion of the two planets there at the top as well. The main focus of the piece is of course this rather big Zarbi here with his big sort of claws, and then his rather unusual looking eyes just sort of popping around the image to say hello. But it looks very cool indeed. And then of course we have a further claw coming towards the bottom. I think that out of all of the releases that we've seen so far, this is probably the simplest. However, that's not to say it's bad. It is simple but effective. It doesn't really exaggerate too much, of course, because the Zarbi are rather ridiculous in their design. However, this does look cool. It's very much like how with the Daleks Master Plan and Evil of the Daleks, they can really play to the strengths of the key monster being the Daleks, because they've always looked cool. And likewise with the Yeti, it is this big, grisly, threatening looking creature. The Zarbi, less so. And then of course flipping around to the back of the display box, of course we're Doctor Who fans and we love consistency, and Demon Music Group know that we love consistency and therefore make these box sets beautifully consistent. Very much as with all of the other releases within this series, we have the inclusion of the TARDIS on the alien landscape, with of course the light there glowing at the very top. This time round we have yet another Zarbi sort of trying to claw his way into the TARDIS, I suppose, with once again the continuation of the alien landscape with the glow coming from it. As per usual, the company information has been confined to one corner along with the barcode, and it does also state in this corner that it does star William Hartnell. The story has been written by Bill Strutton, and it features linking narration by Maureen O'Brien, who does of course portray Vicky. Web Planet and the Abominable Snowmen both have slightly slimmer container boxes compared to that of Evil of the Daleks and the Daleks Master Plan, as they do of course contain less records on the inside. As per usual, the case itself has been made out of a quality cardboard to ensure that the records on the inside of the box are safe when in storage. And naturally, as per usual, this does of course lift off to reveal the inside artwork, which once again is the same format to usual. On the inside of the lid we do of course have a nice variation of the time vortex. This time round it has been given a lovely red filter, once again consistent to the artwork on the front, with a nice white glow emanating from the very middle. And then of course the same can be said for the inside artwork within the box itself. As per usual, on the top of the box we have a piece of paper that does feature the cast list, which I will be coming on to in a second, and the records are of course contained within some cardboard sleeves, slightly thicker to your usual vinyl record sleeve, which on the inside contains your usual artwork of the TARDIS spinning around the vortex. And then of course on the opposite side we have your usual episode details, including LP1, and then of course the episodes that feature on that disc. So side A is of course episode 1, The Web Planet, with its air date on the BBC being the 13th of February 1965, along with the cast. And then we have episode 2, The Zarbi, which broadcast on the 20th of February 1965. Consistent to the previous releases, and I absolutely love it. Due to the cardboard sleeves over the top, it makes this product feel premium in quality and once again protects the records well. As with all of the other releases, we do have the inclusion of the inside leaflet, which does of course present the entirety of the cast in the very middle, along with this splosh design almost, with a few flecks of paint, including reds and greens in there, once again consistent to the colour palette on the outside of the box, along with the air dates of the story and who it has been written by at the very top, and then a few other details relating to the story at the very bottom, including the title music, the story editor, as well as who the actual record itself has been mastered by, and the design of the box and illustrations. I think that it would be nice, considering that this has been featured on all of the records so far, and I think that it would be good to have some variation, so perhaps on the inside of this sleeve, so it doesn't take away from the overall consistency of the rest of the record set, so it is inside, so it's tucked away almost. It would be nice to have maybe some images of the story itself, some actual images as opposed to illustrations, or maybe even some further information about the story itself, just to give a bit more context and details about the story, as I think some images, some high quality pictures of the companions and William Hartnell would really set this box set off and generally make the inside of this sleeve look a little bit more exciting and interesting. As usual, on the inside of the box itself, all of the vinyl records do have this rather unusual sleeve piece. If you put these on the floor and arrange them in a certain order, it does of course reveal a rather large piece of artwork, which we may as well take a look at now. first design that can be seen by placing the record sleeves in a certain order is this rather interesting looking take on the Menoptera costume. At first I was actually quite confused as to what this was, but once again we do have a continuation of the design of the cover with the planets in the background and rather lovely looking skyline. I also really love the inclusion of the red sort of reflective parts on the wings, and then we of course move up to the top to have the silhouette of the Menoptera with the absence of the actual head and any expression or emotion in there. It's quite cool and once again quite simplistic, and to be honest, originally I was quite surprised that they weren't included on the cover, but instead Demon Music Group decided to go with a much more simplistic design. Ping the vinyl sleeves round to the opposite side does reflect another design, which I don't quite know what this is. I can't lie to you. We do have a rather unusual looking, almost volcanic peak piece, along with some darker colours around the side, almost a cave at the very top there. However, it still looks quite cool, but once again isn't as exciting and as impressive as some of the previous releases, and by far the opposite side of the sleeve is a much more interesting design. Very much like the Abominable Snowmen, of course the Web Planet is a 6-part 1960s serial, and therefore it has been presented across 3 records, all of which are stored within the sleeves as previously covered. However, on the spines of the sleeves you do also have the inclusion of the numbers to ensure that you can put the records back in order after you've finished listening to this release. And of course the record colour for this release, much like the rest of the box itself, is a rather vibrant looking pink, which as I mentioned at the very start of this review, I am of course taking a look at the standard edition, therefore as per usual the record itself is just one thick colour, as opposed to having splatters in or sparks or the usual swirl patterns that the Demon Music Group have used in the past on some of their more experimental records that they have of course released, which naturally the material on the record itself does of course remain the same between the 2 releases, so it's just a matter of personal preference. I do assume that the standard edition will be a little bit cheaper than the exclusive variation, and to be honest, as I say, it's only a colour at the end of the day, so if you want a more exciting one and the limited edition one is in stock, then by all means maybe go for that one, but the standard version is still just as nice. Right then. Here we go, the Web Planet. This one's an odd one, isn't it? Firstly, I thought I would mention my shirt, because not gonna lie, my thought processes behind wearing this shirt deserves a little bit of acknowledgement. I'm wearing black and white because it's a 60s episode of Doctor Who. I kind of feel like if the Menoptera opened a Primark, this is probably their style of shirt they would go for. Anyway, I'm just avoiding talking about the story itself. I think that this story is one of those episodes within Doctor Who that stand out because of how ridiculous it is. Of course, I have on my wall, literally just out of shot, the, I think, issue 500 Doctor Who magazine massive poster with all the Doctors on. It's in the background of my old videos that I used to do in my previous accommodation room, and on that poster there is a Zarbi, which I think says a lot, because it is an ant creature, and we have the Menoptera that are fluffy bee creatures, or moths, however you want to look at it. They of course also have those weird wood lice things in there as well, because this episode is entirely focused around what if we get an alien world, kind of take away the humans, and have the insects and the different creatures, however we put them kind of under a magnifying glass in a way, and enlarge them and make them life-size. Have life-size ants, life-size moths, and what exactly happens when you have these creatures ruling a planet. And we do of course see within this story a conflict arising between the Menoptera and the Zarbi, because the Zarbi have become quite hostile and almost like they want to start a war, and the Menoptera are kind of pictured as this omnibenevolent race that just want everything to be happy and good. However, at the same time, they jump very quickly to the idea of wanting to kill things. This is very much like humanity itself in a rather unusual way, especially looking back in the 21st century context. This story naturally suffers with many of the things that 1960s Doctor Who always suffer with. This episode is 6 whole parts long, and it doesn't need to be. It was probably one of the slowest episodes within 60s Doctor Who I think I've in fact ever experienced in my listening of these vinyls over the past few years. because this story could have very easily been reduced down to 4 parts, and it got to a point within episode 4 and episode 5 where it actually got a little bit irritating as to how drawn out it was being, and I'm guessing that was entirely down to the production at the time, that the Web Planet had to fill a certain episode duration slot, probably because the next episode wasn't ready yet, and this episode suffers because of that. I think if I was to go back and do whatever I wanted to this story, it will be to trim out certain sections, because you need to take a pickaxe almost to the narrative of this story and trim out all of the unneeded bits, which there is quite a lot of. This episode is also quite notoriously known for the beeps and boops of the Zarbi, which I can understand why, because I watched this on an evening, this episode, and whilst I was going to sleep I could still hear the noises of the Zarbi in my head, and in fact I had this like on speaker when I was listening to it, and one of my flatmates wondered what the hell I was watching, because it's constant throughout the entire story. Where there is a Zarbi, there will be the beeping and the booping, because they do not have actual communication. Instead, the Zarbi are kind of depicted through this rather unusual, ominous voice from the heavens, which the Doctor speaks via a kind of weird thing that the First Doctor refers to as a hairdressing kind of salon booth hairdryer type thing throughout the story, which is very odd as it is. And of course it turns out, it will be no spoiler to say, because if you're wanting to avoid spoilers, you're like nearly 50 years too late, because this episode aired I think in 1965. Now, it's one of those episodes where the ominous voice is the evil force, which is a trope of classic series Doctor Who that is used over and over again. And I understood why. Of course the Zarbi were being controlled by this ominous voice. It turned out to be this fungus that was taking over the planet, and of course the Menoptera were the all-being good creatures after all. And simply because of the budget of 1960s Doctor Who, this episode is probably one of those stories that doesn't age very well. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying or criticising the visual effects of this story, because I have a rule when it comes to classic series Doctor Who, or any media for that matter. I judge it from the period that it is made from, so I'm not going to criticise the visual effects of the Web Planet up against a massive blockbuster, the likes of, say, Marvel or DC, or any other massive science fiction themed thing currently on TV at the minute, like Doctor Who for example. I'm never going to compare them, because that is just essentially comparing like a Poundland watch to a iPhone, Apple Watch, whatever you call the bleeding things. It's just not fair. And I think that this story, it has heart and soul, and I think that what is brilliant about this episode is that the production team behind it have tried so hard to visualise what Bill Strutton wanted, who was the writer of this story, and I think that for the most part they've done a good job. I think the actual alien landscape, which is also depicted on the record box set for this release, looks lovely. You can quite obviously tell it is a studio, but it looks nice. The bee costumes of the Menoptera are hilarious, and they speak hilariously. Of course they constantly end up doing this throughout the entire story. They got into character, which is the same for the Zarbi as well. All of the people that were in the costume for this story made this episode brilliant, because they had so much care and passion into showing these insects. It was very role play in its design. Likewise for the Zarbi, you could tell they were ant people, they were bopping about, and it worked to an extent. However, it didn't look amazing, and looking back it will be hilarious. I will not lie, I was laughing at this story, but I wasn't laughing in a critical way. I was laughing with it, because it's fun, it has passion, it's got dedication, and it's got heart. However, the actual narrative itself did let it down. It is always interesting as well looking back on classic series Doctor Who and the role of the Doctor throughout stories, because this episode very much seen the companions being the ones that wanted to help. You had Barbara with the Menoptera, you had Ian being attacked by the Zarbi, and you had Vicky being possessed by a weird fork thing throughout the majority of the episode. I don't quite know what she was doing, to be quite honest, but you had all of that going on, and they were wanting to help. Barbara especially was wanting to help the Menoptera, and kind of Ian was trying to help the Zarbi. However, they were being set up to kind of be the villain monster of the piece. Meanwhile, you had the Doctor, which I must admit, Hartnell is lovely. He is warm, he has some great moments. There was a few occasions in the early half of this story where it was clear that he was suffering a little bit, because he was forgetting a number of his lines, especially within the early TARDIS scenes, and he is warm to his companions. He's very caring, he wants to make sure that they get out alive. However, he doesn't really care about about other races at this point. He doesn't care about the alien life, and he wishes just for them to get on with whatever they are doing. He doesn't really care about who gets killed along the way, which I think is very odd. Meanwhile, you have the companions that are being the all-good people who are wanting to help and wanting to solve the problems. And because you have this unusual mix between the Doctor being warm and nice, but also these rather odd moments where he's quite stern with his companions. He's not necessarily that nice to Vicky throughout this story, and then in the next scene he's holding her in a rather comforting manner. I think that he's very all over the place, and I don't quite understand why. And it's one of those episodes that shows that a little bit more than others. A lot of the Hartnell stories Hartnell seems to really get involved in them, and then there's stories such as this where he feels a little bit disconnected all the way throughout, and because of that we get a little bit of an unusual mix between character and personality. The main impression that I got from this story when watching it is that this is what Doctor Who would have been like within the classic series if it was almost performed in front of a live studio audience. Pretty much one location that is used throughout the story's entirety, and if you don't have that one location, you have a location that looks incredibly similar, just with a few little bushes and things added in the way to give a little bit of variety. But generally overall, the story feels very confined between a set number of locations, because the majority of 1960s Doctor Who is like that, and you have these few characters off doing one thing, and then you have a few other characters off doing another, and then eventually they kind of swap. And I feel like this is what the show would be like, as I say, if it was performed on stage. You have these very unique and absurd looking costumes that stand out a lot if they were on stage, and then you have the characters lurking around this landscape. I actually think at the time, if you were to actually put the Web Planet on stage, it would be possible within a full cast audience because of the costumes. It lacks, I would say it lacks in visual effects because it's very practical, the entire thing, as you can tell by the ants running to and from the different locations for obvious reasons, and sometimes some not so obvious reasons as well. And I think that that is the main downfall of this story. There is a lot of moments when I was wondering, what on earth is going on? I'm watching some fully grown men in ant costumes and what looked a bit like latex running about an alien planet, not saying anything, just running about whilst beeping, and that's it. And then you have these other people dressed up as fluffy bees that look like they're gonna go on a night out, and just in bee costumes for a laugh, sort of delivering these very squeaky and odd lines. So I kind of conclude that if you're looking for a more serious episode of 1960s Doctor Who, either a Dalek story would be more up your street, or a pure historical, episodes like The Reign of Terror, for example, that William Hartnell, from what I'm gathering, seemed to like a little bit more than stories such as this that are a bit more out there and science fiction. If you were kind of looking for a Doctor Who story with heart and personality to it, and certainly a few unique concepts, then this story is definitely for you. And if you're looking for a story that is a little bit of a laugh, and they do really try. I am not denying that this episode lacks in effort, because it has effort in bucket loads. Got brilliant costumes for the time, and the fact that the actors actually kept a straight face baffles me as to how they managed that. So this is one of those stories that, as I say, is fun, but it's not serious. Which brings me to the point of how I would kind of change this story, how to cut it down. That is a first, and I think that that is a common thing that is mentioned by a lot of Doctor Who fans relating to this story. It is far too long. Cut it down, get rid of irrelevant scenes, and maybe something that would have made this story better is made the ominous voice irrelevant and gave the voice itself to the Zarbi, as opposed to this ominous voice that is controlling the Zarbi, which would have cut down on the beeping and the booping, but also it would have gave the Zarbi a bit more personality, as opposed to just scurrying around on this unusual landscape, making very little sense of the situation. Meanwhile, the actual main protagonist, being the Doctor and his companions, they were alright, they were decent, they were kind of, had the contributions I would expect from a 1960s episode of Doctor Who, the Doctor being the main focus, Ian and Barbara kind of being the secondary focus, which I thought both of them were brilliant. William Russell and Jacqueline Hill were as lovely as ever, and Vicky just didn't really have too much to do. I think at this point they were kind of lost with what to do with her. So yeah, it's an alright episode. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it's the worst episode in Doctor Who history, because it definitely isn't. I don't think any episode within Doctor Who kind of deserves the title of worst episode, because even the really bad stories have something about them that a writer has put in. Somebody at the end of the day has put in time to write a story, and that is always worth credit. And the same occurs for this story. Effort and passion makes this story good, but the narrative itself kind of needs more work, a lot more work. So overall, for yet another Doctor Who Classic Series serial within the record format as produced by the Demon Music Group, another welcome addition to the collection, and I think that the Web Planet was a very interesting choice. So far within this series we have of course seen a focus on the missing Doctor Who serials, most notably of course the Daleks' Master Plan, Evil of the Daleks and the Abominable Snowmen, and I thought that that was going to be the main focus of this series. I thought all of the products that they will be releasing will be dedicated to missing Doctor Who serials, and then all of a sudden the announcement of the Web Planet did in fact take me by surprise. It certainly opens the boundaries of what other Doctor Who serials could be released on this format in the future. I love the way that it is breathing new life into 60s Doctor Who, particularly if you are a fan of the era and like these episodes, or in particular like the Web Planet, then this is a perfect release for you, because it is not just the target novelisation, it is not just the DVD, it is something a little bit more special to add to your collection. A bright, vibrant vinyl with a really cool and contemporary looking piece of artwork to be added to your collection, and a rather high quality item at that. So as per usual, this series is not going to be for everybody. I certainly do not recommend it to the younger Doctor Who fans who are only just either getting into vinyl or not at all into vinyl yet. In order to have your £50 worth, it is worth listening to this story in record format as opposed to your usual TV or reading the target novelisation version. As I say, it breathes new life into the story and is worth it if you're a fan of the era, and I'm intrigued to see what the Demon Music Group do next. Personally, for me, I would like them to focus on the missing stories, because I think that's just a little bit more special and generally makes a bit more sense. However, I would also like to see more focus on the First Doctor era, because so far we've only seen one missing Doctor Who serial from the First Doctor era within this series, and I would love to see more. Other episodes I would like to see, maybe the Wheel in Space or the Crusades, or maybe even Marco Polo. That would be quite cool. I imagine that they could do a really creative piece of artwork for Marco Polo as well, which would be quite interesting. So as per usual, I hope you've enjoyed this review. Do of course stay tuned for more Doctor Who vinyl record reviews in the future, and if you have any questions about this release, then please do feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I'll try my best to answer them at some point in the near future. So thanks for watching, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.